Welcome everybody to Lessons from the Field. As you know, this is a series of interviews that we do with a diverse array of guests who have a common thread, and that is a passion for pharmacy and pharmaceutical sciences. And today, we're very lucky to have Benish alum, who is a 2019 graduate of our PharmD program. She's done a PGY1 and a PGY2, and is currently in her PGY2 in Florida. She's going to tell us about that. So we have some questions we'll ask her, and I know that these will elucidate some valuable insight for our current students and other recent graduates. Benish, let's go ahead and get started. First of all, it's great to see you again. If you could just tell us, what have you been doing since you graduated?
Hi, Dean Schumock. First of all, thank you for having me. This is really exciting, and it's always great to hear from, old faculty and friends from UIC. So I was really excited to do this. What I've been doing since graduation. So I graduated in 2019, and then I went on to do a PGY1 at Indiana University Health in their downtown academic health center, which is one of the largest hospitals in the state. And when COVID hit around, March, April of this year, when I was still a PGY1. And so our entire department, our entire institution really had to shift and adapt, and residents were a really big part of that. Like, I'm, front of the front line. And so it was scary and exciting, and you get to learn new stuff every day. But it was just so fascinating that, there was a time where there was critical care providers asking me things about random drugs that they'd never heard of before, but that I had heard of before because I had done a rotation in it. And so they really valued my opinion. And I think we got to see a little bit of how pharmacy is appreciated throughout the pandemic a little bit more. So it was difficult, but still rewarding in a sense. And then since then, I am now in my PGY2 in clinical pharmacogenomics at the University of Florida, which I feel so lucky about every day. I get to train with some of the leaders and founders in the field, people whose, papers and projects I was reading about when I was a student for years. And now I get to train with them. And so that has absolutely been so exciting. And every day I learn so much, and I get to contribute so much to the program. And it's just, I'm really excited to be here.
Great. Wow. Sounds like you've done wonderful. I know you're working with some former University of Illinois at Chicago faculty there. And I know how great they are. So good for you.
Yeah. Absolutely. And it was really great to be able to make that UIC connection. When I arrived here, Dr. Larry Cavallari was like, "Oh yeah, you're from UIC. We have that connection." And it was just an instant, positive. So that was great.
Of course.
Too.
I mean, they know the quality of UIC students all across the world. So I'm sure that was a big part of it. So yeah. Let's see. In the short time that you've been out, you mentioned a little bit about the COVID pandemic and the experience you got there. What are other highlights of your time that really been satisfying or opened your eyes in the field of pharmacy?
So really, I'd probably have to start back when I was still at UIC, honestly. There was an interprofessional course that I took called Interprofessional Approaches to Health Disparities in conjunction with the College of Medicine, College of Nursing, College of Social Work, and with Dr. Jenny Jarrett and Dr. Mike Koronkowski. Yeah. And we worked in these interprofessional groups doing projects, year-long projects. And we worked with patients who were elderly. We worked with domestic abuse victims. We worked with refugee populations, the homeless population. We got to see all of these different populations that were really just right by UIC in Chicago, and how they interact with the healthcare system, and how we as interprofessional members of healthcare can make a difference for them. And that was definitely one of the things that, sort of sparked a little fire in me. But it wasn't even just that. I remember like we would meet every few weeks, just the pharmacy students with Dr. Jarrett and Dr. Koronkowski. And it would be like at 7 a.m. in the morning at the crack of dawn. No one else is around. It's
Wow.
cold and dark out. And I remember we would go to Dr. Jarrett's office, and the purpose of those meetings was to really like sit and talk about our projects and our progress and things that are going on, things that we need help figuring out. But sometimes we would just sit and talk about life, and like those moments were just so invigorating and really helped sort of replenish my passion for pharmacy and my passion for what I was doing. And it was just little things like that.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, definitely like, I think there's so many opportunities even just at UIC. And I remember like when I was a student, one of my classmates did a presentation on how to communicate and interact with patients who are transgender. And there's also, I went to so many sessions of like, this is how you dose medications for someone who is fasting. And this is how we talk to patients who are victims of trauma, like trauma informed care. And all of that is just so important. And now that I've left UIC, I've noticed that there's not a lot of companies and there's not a lot of institutions or programs, not that many out here that are having those conversations. And I think that is definitely something that expanded my worldview so much at UIC.
Okay. That's awesome. Yeah, it's good to hear that, especially from students who are out and then kind of recognize the really good things. And I guess that brings me to the next question. It's really for students who are here. I mean, that isn't a good example of something that maybe you would suggest they pay more attention to because it's going to be important when they leave. Is there other things during the pharmacy program you think students should really focus on that you found now have really influenced what you're doing or put you in a better position?
Definitely while I was at UIC, there was a lot of other opportunities, even just outside of the robust curriculum. Like a lot of the PGX and pharmacogenomics exposure that I had that has led me to where I am today was outside of the classroom. And so, and like I mentioned before, like there's so many organizations that are doing service in the community and so many different ways to get involved and to really make a difference, like boots on the ground kind of service, not just in an abstract way, like, oh, we're going to make people's lives better and then talk about it for an hour, but actually going out and talking to communities, engaging with those communities that have no idea what a pharmacist can provide, have no idea what a student pharmacist can provide, and actually making a difference in those people's lives. So that was one of the things that I 100% cherished about my time at UIC, and I would encourage every student to just be involved in the things that you're passionate about. It's definitely there. You just have to look for it a little bit.
Yeah, that's great. Great advice. Is there other things about the program at UIC that you want to highlight that helped you prepare either to secure a residency or your PGY1 or PGY2? I know we have so many students interested in following your footsteps, and advice
Yeah.
to them would be very helpful, I think.
So I think probably the one thing that I did was knock on a lot of doors, stick my nose in a lot of things that people weren't expecting, and just really just put myself out there and go talk to professors and other people like clinicians and anyone that's at UIC and just say, hey, I'm really interested in learning about what you do. And I think that as a student and as a learner and as a trainee, this time of your career is probably one of the easiest times you can do that. And people really respond positively to an engaged learner, someone who's passionate about like learning about what they do and things like that. And I never ever had any like professor turn me away. I never had any mentor turn me away. Anytime I wanted to talk about anything. And again, like not even necessarily pharmacy stuff. Like I remember going to Dr. Katz's office one day about something random, and we ended up talking about life for like an hour. And so just, I mean, just, I think just the people there
Yeah.
is a resource that you can't understate.
Yeah, it's great. That advice is so important because, sometimes our students are hesitant about approaching people. They feel intimidated or shy or whatever. You certainly weren't that way. In fact, I think I remember you coming up to me for the first time at the APHA meeting. Wasn't that where? Do you
I'm
remember that?
maybe, I'm not really sure.
But I was impressed. So, and I know that a lot of other people were. So definitely, definitely that networking is really what you're talking about in a lot of ways.
Yeah,
Important.
I think so. But also, I think I'm just so, I wouldn't describe myself as a networker or like extroverted in any way. I was just, wanted to do stuff and wanted to talk to people and be with people that were doing stuff. And so it just made sense.
Yeah, that sounds good. So I know you're doing some fabulous stuff there. It'd be interesting to hear like what you're doing in your PGY2 because it's such a cutting edge area, and obviously it excites you. So what is it you're doing that's so exciting and builds for the future? I know.
Yeah, so I mean, pharmacogenomics is, I think, still very niche and still such a new field. And that what excites me about it is that there's still so much more discovery that we could be doing that needs to be done. And, there's always new clinical applications and clinical suggestions that we can do and data coming out all the time. And it's just so exciting to sort of be at that forefront and say, last week I saw a patient in clinic and I could make these recommendations, but next week I'll be able to make new recommendations. And just my passion really is where I get to see those patients and say, this is where we are at the forefront of science, and this is what we can do for you today. And just seeing all of those conversations that I've had with patients about that is probably one of the most invigorating parts of my job, is just seeing that light bulb click of like, oh, I didn't know that. We see a lot of psych patients in our clinic and who have cycled through so many different medications, and then they're just not responding or they're having all these toxicities. And then we'll do their test, their pharmacogenetic tests, and then we'll get the results back. And it's like a light switch goes off. They'll be like, oh, so I wasn't crazy for the past 20 years. Like I was actually feeling something. And all of like the past 20 years of my life being miserable, there was actually a reason for it. And so it's moments like that. It's moments like, I had a conversation with a very elderly woman who had a very specific type of tumor, and she had a mutation in her tumor that we could treat, that we could target with a therapy. And I remember like having this discussion with her, like, this is a good thing. We can actually specifically target your mutation in your cancer. And I remember her just like bursting into tears and crying. And I was like, this is good news. Like, why are you crying? And she was like, well, my grandson also has cancer, but he doesn't have a targetable mutation. And so I wish I could almost like transplant this science for him. And so it's things like that where you just realize that, yeah, it's not necessarily the standard of care. It's not necessarily, the most robust data out there. We're working on that. We're working on generating data. We're working on making these implications real for patients. But in the meantime, the progress is there and those lives are still being touched and they're still being changed. And so that for me is like, it's just my bread and butter. I just eat it up.
Yeah, what a great combination. I mean, you're working with some of the top scientists in the field, and then you're able to see the fruits of that labor in the patient care environment and how it actually helps patients. So I can see why it's so exciting for you.
Yeah.
So I know when you were here, it's only been a year and a half, you had a ton of friends. And I know there's a lot of students probably still here who remembered you. What advice do you have for any of them, either our current students or recent graduates, based on your world experience?
My 1.5 years of world
Yeah,
experience.
exactly.
I think I would definitely say, and this is something I had to kind of learn the hard way myself, is take care of yourself, because nothing you do is sustainable unless you yourself are sustained. And it's not just about talking about like pharmacist burnout and how do we, fix that, and all these workshops and all these conferences and pharmacists are burning out and all of this. It's not just that. There has to be a personal decision that you make that says, this is why I'm going to do this. This is why I want to do this. And this is what's going to sustain me every single day when I wake up in the morning. And so when you do that, it sort of helps to alleviate the burden of the journey. I know people tend to look at like PGY1 or PGY2. They're like, it's just 1 year, it's just 2 years. You just have to get through it. And that's, that can be really rough. It's not easy. But having those little things every day where you say to yourself, okay, this is why I'm doing this today. And this is why I'm going to wake up tomorrow and do it again, it just helps make the journey easier. And when you get to the other side, you'll just be so much more sustained and passionate about what you're doing. And I think that shows in all of our interactions with other providers, patients, other pharmacists, even our own personal communities.
Yeah, so true. Thank you for that. Last question though, just maybe a shout out to folks that you worked with over the years that influenced your career, either while you're here or now down in Florida, where I know we have a lot of former faculty and connections. So any of those experiences or people you want to highlight?
Oh my gosh, there's so many. I would be
Yeah.
afraid of.
We don't want to make anyone upset by not.
Okay.
So you could just
well,
say,
number one is Dean Schumock.
Okay, we can end now. Wrap. It's a wrap.
I mean, honestly, like when I first started at UIC, I actually talked to Dr. Julio Duarte, who was still there. It was like October of my P1 year. And I was like, hey, I'm really interested in learning about what you do. And he was like, that's cool. That's great. I'm excited for you, but I'm leaving in 2 weeks to go to Florida. So when I came down here, when I came down here and I talked to him and we reconnected. And so that was great. Same with Dr. Cavallari. She wasn't here when I started, but the first project that I ever worked on was named after her grant. I remember like I would log in every day and it would say Cavallari grant. I was like, who is this? And so like just getting to meet her finally was just so surreal.
Yeah, that's great.
Definitely. I think the professors I mentioned earlier, so many people who just didn't even, it wasn't even necessarily like they were teaching us or lecturing us, like Dr. Popovich, Dr. Pluta, Dr. Katz, Dr. Schlemmer, all of these people who just gave a little bit of themselves personally to me as a student, helped me and encouraged me and all of that. I remember P1 year, I was applying for the Ryback Fellowship under Dr. Hyun Jung. And I remember being kind of like nervous. And I went to her and I was like, yeah, I have this like application and, I wrote it all out. Here's my proposal. I don't know if I'm cut out for this. Like, it seems really competitive and I don't know if I'm going to get it. And I don't know if I'm cut out for it. And I remember her being like very nonchalantly, she was like, oh, if it's your dream, I'll support you. And I was like, oh, okay. So I went for it and I got it. And I spent the summer doing, research with her. And that was like definitely like the jumping point for me, where I just dove right into PGX after that.
As a P1, that's
like I said, I just showed up and I was like, hey, I want to do stuff. And then I remember she recommended that I talk to Dr. Edith Nutescu, who I spent the next 3 years with, and then working a little bit also with Dr. James Lee. And I spent the next 3 years really focused on working with Dr. Nutescu, and just all of her guidance, all of her leadership, like all of her mentorship has definitely had a massive impact on my life. And I learned so much from her outside of the classroom that I know makes a difference in my life now, because now as a PGY2, when someone's like, oh, can you do this? I'm like, yeah, I already did that as a student. Like, I'm used to doing this. And so awesome. Just all of these like incredible mentors, and literally like pretty much every person that was there, including friends, including other classmates. It's just sharing that space and sharing that time and just being able to journey and move forward together and upward together is definitely something I'm grateful for.
Yeah, wow. It's good. I'm starting to tear up here, so we're gonna have to end this interview. So, I mean, it's so great. I mean, all of those people, and it doesn't end.
Yeah,
Doesn't end here. It continues the rest of your career. You'll just keep building that network, and they'll come to your aid when you need it, and you'll do that for them.
Yeah, and everyone, like, I remember even like just preceptors P4 year from UIC and even outside preceptors were so dedicated and so devoted to our education and our growth. And I'm not really sure if I would have gotten that if I had gone elsewhere. So definitely grateful.
Good. We're gonna put that onto a recruitment video, if you don't mind.
Okay.
This has been awesome. It's so great to see you again, reconnect. And I know when we get this interview out, there's going to be a lot of people interested in listening and seeing you on it. So thank you for doing this. I think our students really appreciate it too.
Thank you so much for having me. It was such a delight to be able to share.